Hi, it's Kayla, and today I'm going to be talking about my experience being legally blind in mainstream school, so like kindergarten through 12th grade. And by mainstream school, I mean just like a regular old public school. I didn't go to a school for the blind or anything like that. So I'm just going to be sharing my experience, what it was like for me in school, and what kinds of accommodations I used and things like that. So hopefully this video will be interesting or even helpful for those of you who may be in school, or possibly for parents or teachers of visually impaired or blind children. And I thought this was a timely topic because right now kids are going back to school and I just finished school. So for those of you who have been watching my channel, you probably know that for the past 2 years I've been in graduate school, which is why I haven't been posting as frequently or as consistently as I would like to, but I just graduated, so I officially have my master's degree in social work. I graduated with a 3.95 GPA, no big deal, which was also the GPA I had in undergrad as well. Also, no big deal. And I did a video a while back talking about the accommodations I used in college and grad school and my experience there, so I will be sure to link that video. I'm also just going to throw out there that it has been 10 years since I graduated high school. I graduated in 2010, so I started kindergarten in like 1997, so it has been a while since I was in public school, so things may be different nowadays, especially with technology and whatnot. So I'm just going to start by answering the question that some of you may have, which is, did I like going to public school, or do I wish that I would have gone to a school for the blind? And I think that public school was the best place for me at that time. When I was younger, my vision was right on the cusp of being considered legally blind. So I still had a lot of usable vision. And so I feel like I fit in a lot more with the sighted world than the blind world. Like, I didn't identify as being blind. I identified as being visually impaired. And I thought that like I didn't have anything in common with blind people. And I was really not interested in learning things like how to use a cane or learning to read Braille, because I thought the vision that I had was good enough and I didn't need to learn those things. So I think if I had gone to a school for the blind, I would have not been very receptive of learning those kinds of things. So I think mainstream school was the best place for me at that time in my life. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's really get into it. We'll start with elementary school and then move on to middle and high school. So my accommodations in elementary school, I sat in the front row so I could see the whiteboard, and my teachers used black bold markers to write on the board so I could see it better. And I also had this little dome magnifier, we called it Maggie, that was its little nickname, that I used pretty much for everything. They also really wanted me to use this monocular, which is like a little telescope, to help me see the board and things far away, but that just didn't work for me. It never has. I've tried it multiple times. I just don't like it. It doesn't work for me and my vision, but they really wanted me to use it, and I think they thought I was just embarrassed or I was being difficult, which wasn't true. So I think that's something that teachers and parents should keep in mind, is that even if a accommodation or some tool seems like it would be helpful and that it should be helpful, doesn't always mean that it's going to work for that individual and their vision. Another accommodation I used is that at one point I had a lamp on my desk to give me some extra light for reading and writing, which was helpful. I also sometimes got to sit out in gym class depending on what we were doing. So like dodgeball, I would sit out for that. Or sometimes I would participate with some accommodations, like we would play kickball, and sometimes I would kick the ball and someone else would run the bases for me. So something like that. So it was adaptable, but I still got to participate. But most of the time I did participate. Something else that I remember is that I would always get bad grades on my report card in handwriting, which was an actual subject that we got grades for. which I always felt like wasn't fair because even though I could see well enough to write, I couldn't see what I was writing very clearly for it to be neat. So my handwriting was always messy, which like wasn't my fault. There was nothing that I could do about that. So I felt like that kind of wasn't fair. Not that it really matters. I mean, your grades and handwriting on your elementary school report card literally has no bearing on the future of your life at all, but it just kind of made me feel bad about myself. So throughout school, I had a teacher of the visually impaired, or a TVI, that would come to see me every once in a while to check in and see how things were going and maybe work with me on some skills or show me different tools or equipment, things like that. So when I was in the 4th grade, my TVI taught me how to type without looking at the keyboard, which was a very useful skill for me because I can't see the keys to like look down at the keyboard and type while looking. So to be able to learn like the positioning of your fingers and how to type without looking was a very useful skill and something I'm very glad that I learned so early on so that I was able to, just become even more efficient at that the older that I got. So I think that's a really good skill to teach someone who's visually impaired when they're young. I don't know, they probably teach typing in kindergarten now or something since computers are so common. So I want to touch on the social aspect of school really quick before I move on to middle school. So in elementary school, I did not hide my vision impairment at all. I was not embarrassed about it. It was just whatever. And I actually had a lot of friends. I was very social. I fit in very well. I was not teased. People didn't really think that I was weird or different. They didn't care that I used a magnifier. And even, I don't know if I would really consider myself popular. I don't know what a popular 10-year-old looks like, but I did have a lot of friends and I was really well liked. And honestly, I think elementary school was the time in my life where I have felt the most normal and the most whole because I was included. People didn't isolate me. I played with everyone else in recess. I was in Girl Scouts. I went to birthday parties and sleepovers, and I had a lot of friends, and it was just really nice to be included and to not feel like I was so different or to feel like people were avoiding me because I was different because I couldn't see. So elementary school was a great time. Okay, so let's move on to middle school. So middle school was kind of a transition period for me, vision-wise, because in elementary school, I did not hide my vision impairment at all, and in high school, I hardcore hid it. And so middle school was kind of that transition period. I made a video a while back about going more into depth about why I hid my vision impairment and how and why I stopped later in life. I will link that video. So in middle school, I used my magnifier sometimes, like in some classes, but not in others. And I did get teased a little bit. I was not bullied. It was not that severe. It was very mild teasing about me using a magnifier or not being able to see. And that's what led me to want to start hiding it so that I didn't get teased and so that I would fit in more. So since I was kind of weaning off using that magnifier, I started getting accommodations of large print textbooks, and I would get my classwork in large print. So like worksheets or tests, things like that would be given to me in large print. I also got copies of PowerPoints, which I got throughout high school as well, which was a very useful accommodation because it was difficult to kind of read what was on the screen and then write it down on my paper and go back to the screen and back to the paper. It was a lot of focusing and refocusing, and a lot of times they would have the lights off too while they were doing a PowerPoint, which my handwriting when it's dark would just go way downhill to where it would be barely legible. So getting those copies of PowerPoint so I could just have them and keep them. I didn't have to take notes with writing was very helpful. And starting in middle school is when I started to notice this kind of phenomenon that I have talked about before, and that is that I was really pushed to use my vision as much as possible, to really strain my eyes and to do things with as little of accommodation as possible. So for example, the smallest size font I could read was 18. And so all of my work was given to me in size 18 font. And so I really had to strain my eyes to do schoolwork. It was very physically exhausting, and it made me kind of like not like school and not like schoolwork because it took so much out of me to do, especially assignments that required a lot of reading. And I remember this one time in particular, I had my English class the last period of the day, and we had a pretty lengthy test in there that I couldn't read it. It was too small, it was too hard, I couldn't read it. And I told my English teacher, and she was like, well, this is the size font you always read, why can't you read it? And I was just like, I don't know, I just can't. And she was like, well, Miss so-and-so says that you can read this in her class, which was my second period teacher, and it was my math class. So there's a big difference of in the morning when your eyes are fresh and at the end of the day when they're tired. And there's a big difference between a math test, which is very minimal reading, and an English test, which is like pages and pages, a lot of reading. So there's a big difference between those two scenarios. And me being 11 years old, I didn't really know how to articulate that and how to explain how I could read this font sometimes, but I couldn't right now. And I think she was thinking I was just trying to get out of it, which wasn't true at all. And I think it's really important for teachers and parents to realize this and keep this in mind, that our vision does fluctuate, and sometimes it depends on how much reading it is, or how tired our eyes are, or even like the lighting in the classroom. It's not just as simple as being like, if you can see this time, then you can always see that. All right, so moving right along into high school. In high school is where I really started to, like I said, like hardcore hide my vision impairment. I did not want anybody to know. I just wanted to fit in. I did not use a magnifier at all. Nobody knew that I even had a magnifier. People did not know that I was visually impaired. So the accommodations I had in high school, I continued to sit in the front row, continued to get copies of PowerPoints, I continued to have large print copies of assignments and large print textbooks. And with the large print assignments, they would copy it on like this big sheet of paper. So I would always fold them in half, so it would look like just a regular size piece of paper, just horizontal. So it was more discreet. Sometimes though, teachers would like walk in with it unfolded and like set it on my desk, and I'd like fold it real quick, like hopefully no one saw that. I had a handful of teachers that instead of just making a very large copy of the worksheet, they would go on their computer and actually change the font size of the document and print it out larger. And I really liked that because one, it was on a regular size sheet of paper, and two, they would make it even bigger, like around 22 font. So it was a lot more comfortable to read. And I just really appreciated that. And it made such a difference of how much easier I could do the work and how much more I enjoyed doing the work when it was more comfortable for me to read and I wasn't having to strain my eyes. And I really think that that is how accommodations should be done, to where it's comfortable to do the work, not to where we are straining to do the work. And it really made a huge difference for me of how easy it was to do the work and how much more I enjoyed learning and enjoyed school when I wasn't having to work so hard just to be able to see it and to read it. So a lot of times in class, I really pretended like I could see things. Like I would pretend like I could see what they were writing on the board, and I would pretend like I could read my regular print textbook. Like if we were if the class was reading something out loud, I would just sit there and stare at my book, like pretending like I could read it and just like turn the page when everyone else turned their page. And I got away with that for the most part because I was smart and I could usually auditorily follow along with just like what they were saying or what they were reading out loud, that I didn't really need to see what was on the board or really need to read what was in the textbook for the most part. But sometimes we would have like in-class assignments where we had to use the textbook to like fill out a worksheet or something. And in those cases, in a couple of classes, I would use my large print book in the back of the classroom and just hope that nobody looked back there and saw me. But after I did that a few times, I would like kind of hear people whispering and I wasn't sure if they were like talking about me or making fun of me. So then I stopped doing that. So what I would do instead is if we had an in-class assignment, I would leave the classroom, I would take my large print book to the special education room and do my work in there. There was also a CCTV in that room, which for those of you who don't know, it's like an electronic magnifier that you put your paper or your book under, and then it magnifies it up on like this computer screen. And I really liked using that because I could make the font as big as I wanted to. So a lot of times I would do assignments in that room and, it probably looked kind of suspicious that when we were doing an in-class assignment, I would just like leave class. But my thinking was, even though it looked suspicious, if they didn't know why I was leaving the classroom, then they couldn't make fun of me for it. Oh, and another accommodation that I had is that my teachers knew not to call on me to read out loud. So I always read very, very slowly, just because it was hard to focus my eyes. And when I read out loud, I literally sounded like a kindergartner learning to read. And it was very embarrassing. And so my teachers knew, like, if they were going around the room and everyone was reading a paragraph out of the book, they just skipped me. They did not call on me to read out loud. So all of my teachers knew that I did not want anyone to know that I was visually impaired, and most all of them cooperated with that. I had a few teachers that really went above and beyond to be discreet, which I always really appreciated. However, I did have a few issues. So I had this teacher one time, and I think all of my teachers knew that I had a magnifier, but that I was not going to use it in class. But apparently somebody told this teacher that I kept my magnifier in my purse. So one day in class, we were working on something, and she said in front of the entire class, "Kayla, get out your magnifier and use it. I know you keep it in your purse." And I was mortified. Like, I wanted to crawl under my desk and die that she told me to use my magnifier in front of the whole class. And I was just kind of like, oh, I took it out. I don't have it. Like, I was not going to use it. And I really think that this was not okay for her to do. I get if my teachers thought that me wanting to hide my vision impairment, sometimes at the expense of my schoolwork, wasn't a great idea. Like, I totally get that, but that was my decision to make, and that was not their place to out me in front of the entire class. And her doing this to try and like force me to use it did not help me, because I still didn't use it, and all it did was make me very much dislike her and dislike her class. I had another class, which was my freshman English class, where every morning we had a writing prompt that was like on a PowerPoint slide up on the TV, which I couldn't see from my seat. And so their solution was that I would just walk up to the TV, stand there and read the prompt, and then walk back to my seat. And I did not want to do that, because that really called attention to myself to just like stand with my face right in front of the TV, and then I'd have to stand there for an abnormally long time because it took me a really long time to read. So I just didn't do them. And I failed the first half of freshman English because I didn't do those every day. And I feel like there were other options. Like, they could have printed out the PowerPoint slide for me. They could have written it down and given me the piece of paper. The English teacher could have like walked by and verbally told me what the prompt was. He could have verbally just read the prompt out to the entire class. Like, there were other options other than making me stand in front of the TV, which they knew I wasn't going to do. And so I feel like this is another important lesson for parents and teachers that if your idea of an accommodation is something that you know they're not going to do and there are other options, then you're just setting them up for failure. So also in high school, I took standard classes as opposed to taking honors classes, even though I was plenty smart enough to take honors classes, but they were a lot more work and a lot more reading, which I did not have the physical, visual energy to do. So I took standard classes because they were easier for me. And I also had like a handful of classes that had like a teacher's assistant. And so when we would have tests in the class, they would take me out into a different room and they would read the tests to me, which I really like and was really such a relief to not have to read them and strain my eyes. I really liked that. But one day, junior year, my English teacher yelled at me because she said I was too smart to be in her class. I shouldn't be in her class. I should have taken honors English, and that I was smart enough to go to college and I shouldn't be getting my tests read to me because they're not going to read tests to me in college. Now, this was a teacher that I typically really liked, and so I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and say that she was just having a bad day. And like, I kind of get where she was coming from, because she was saying like, I was too smart to be in her class, like I wasn't living up to my potential, okay, she didn't really know my reasonings behind it. But she told me that I shouldn't be getting my tests read to me because they won't do that in college, which number one, that is completely incorrect. I had every single one of my tests read to me in college, which was a huge help. And two, I don't feel like that is good advice to say that you shouldn't use this accommodation now because you won't have it in the future. In order to prepare for that, you should not use this accommodation. Like, I think you should take advantage of what you have that's helping you right now. Oh, and something I forgot to mention earlier is that I got accused of cheating a lot by my classmates. So for one, I took standard classes, and so I was quite a bit smarter than a lot of people in those classes. And so a lot of times when I would do really well on a test or an assignment that a lot of people didn't do well on, they thought I cheated. Or they would see like my large print worksheet or my large print textbook, and they thought it was a teacher's edition. And so they thought that I had all of the answers, which is, I don't know, really silly that they thought that I was just handed all of the answers and handed the teacher's edition. I don't know why they thought that, but they did. And so I did get accused of cheating a lot. So before I wrap this up, I just want to touch on the social aspect of high school and talk about, was it worth it to go through all this trouble to hide my vision impairment? So since nobody knew that I was visually impaired, I did not get made fun of for that. I was teased a little bit for being clumsy because I would often like run into things or trip over things. I was also teased a little bit for having a lazy eye. And of course I was teased about things that were not blindness related, like everyone gets teased in school. So I was teased for like being too skinny or for looking like a dumb blonde, but it was all very minor. Like I was not bullied, which I'm very thankful for because I know a lot of visually impaired people that I've kind of connected with over the internet have been bullied and have been bullied pretty severely when they were in school. So I'm very fortunate that that did not happen to me. However, I didn't really have a lot of friends. And I think a lot of this had to do with the fact that I couldn't see and that people didn't know that I couldn't see. So I had a very bad reputation for being stuck up because I didn't wave to people in the hallway or say hello to them because I couldn't see them. But they just thought I was being rude and unfriendly. I also had a hard time making friends because I felt very awkward approaching people because I couldn't like recognize someone in the hallway and just be like, oh, hi, you're in my math class. And I also felt awkward talking to people because of my lazy eye, and I felt like they weren't going to know that I was talking to them because it didn't look like I was looking at them and it would be embarrassing. So I kind of kept to myself a lot. I did kind of have like a small but good group of friends my freshman year and my sophomore year, but then my junior year, I didn't have classes with any of those people, and I didn't have lunch period with anybody that I knew, and I ate lunch by myself the entirety of my junior year, or I ate lunch at a table with a bunch of other people who ate lunch by themselves, so it was like a table full of people who no one talked to each other, and I was very lonely and felt very isolated. On the weekends, I sat at home by myself and did nothing while everyone else was like at their friend's house or having sleepovers. And then my senior year, I became really good friends with this guy that I ended up dating for a long time. And then I kind of just like adopted his group of friends as my own, which like that kind of worked. But for the most part, high school was pretty lonely for me. I felt very isolated. I felt like all of these other people really had a lot more friends than me or were like always doing stuff, and I felt like no one was ever inviting me to do things. So I don't know if people knew that I couldn't see, if it would have helped me to have more friends because they wouldn't have thought I was rude, or maybe people would have like approached me more often if they knew. I don't know, or it could have gone the other way, and maybe I would have been severely bullied if people had known, I don't know. But all in all, high school was definitely not the worst thing, but I probably would not go back and do it again. Okay, so that's the end of this video. I know this was probably extremely long, but it was like, 13 years of my life, so I guess that's a lot to put into one video, but I hope you guys liked this video. Let me know down in the comments below what your school experience has been as a visually impaired or legally blind child. Did you go to mainstream school or a school for the blind? I'd love to hear about it. And yeah, that's all, and I will see you guys next time.